Fallout power armor is some of the most advanced technology ever created, and yet the hydraulics can lock mid-fight, sealing you inside a half-ton metal tomb, or a random ghoul with the right knowledge can easily kill you with a flaw that was never supposed to make it out of the factory. But that begs the question, what actually is power armor, and how does it work? Well, today I'm breaking that down, along with its strengths, its flaws, and the strange fact that something basically designed to fail the person wearing it is still the one thing every single person wants the second they see it. A war about oil. Every single flaw in this video traces back to one fact, and it's not a small one. Power armor was never designed properly at all. It was thrown together in a panic. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual reason the chest plate weld breaks, the reason it runs out of power, the reason an entire generation of soldiers died testing equipment that wasn't ready. It exists because of a war, and whether you call that war America defending itself or a fight over who got to keep using the gas depends entirely on your choice of diplomacy. Probably both at once, actually. And this is coming from someone who has gone through way too many in-game terminal entries trying to find the right answer. The development started in August 2065. At this point, the US military could no longer deploy their armored vehicles due to lack of fuel, which meant an entire branch of the military was suddenly fighting a war it physically could not supply. So they commissioned arms manufacturers to design something without that flaw. Several manufacturers took the task up, but West Tech, the name you'll find on nearly everything military pre-war in this whole franchise, was among them. And they didn't get that reputation by accident. The first breakthrough wasn't the armor, it was the power source. And without it, none of the rest of this story happens. In 2066, West Tech's research produced a working fusion cell. Simple compared to later versions, but actually small enough to carry, and that was the part that mattered. You can build all the heavy armor plating you want, but none of it moves if you can't fit a power source small enough for a person to carry on their back. And that single engineering constraint shaped every suit that came after it. That's the boring part of the story the games never really talk about. The actual battery, but it's the part that made everything else possible. Then, that very winter, China invaded Alaska to seize control of its oil fields. And the war stopped being theoretical. Tensions had escalated on both sides enough that a war over a pipeline seemed reasonable to the people who actually had the power to declare one, and reasonable, in this case, meant soldiers were about to die over a fuel line. This is the start of the Sino-American War, and the reason every power armor decision after this point got made with urgency instead of careful engineering. The T-45 came out of that urgency, completed in January 2067, and sent into battle on the Alaskan front within days of being finished, with no time left over to test whether it actually worked. It was poorly designed, too bulky, and moved slowly, and it had a major flaw where the weld point on the chest plate was weak against rounds, which meant the suit that was supposed to protect soldiers had a hole in its own armor by design, but it gave soldiers heavy weapons capable of killing an enemy that ordinary infantry couldn't handle, and in 2067 that was enough to matter, even if it wasn't enough to actually be safe. The T-45 held the line in Alaska for almost a decade, which is honestly a remarkable run for something designed in such a hurry, and also a sign of just how little the wasteland's future was going to improve on it. It proved a lot less effective when the United States tried to carry the fight onto the Chinese mainland in 2074, and effective is being generous. By then, Chinese forces had Gauss rifles that could pierce straight through the T-45's armor, and the suit was burning through power faster than supply lines could keep up, which meant soldiers were going into combat in suits that could fail twice over, once from enemy fire and once from running dry. The better you make your armor, the less that matters if the energy keeping it running runs out before resupply arrives. And that exact problem didn't go away after the war. It followed power armor into every single game that came after. None of that explains how the thing actually works once you're standing inside it, though, and that part is where this stops being a history lesson. Because the same system that makes you strong enough to punch through concrete is also strong enough to break every bone in your body the second it stops listening to you. The hardware. Every single piece of armor plating on a power armor suit is doing less work than you think. And the part that actually matters is the one nobody looks at. Strip away the plating, the paint job, and the chest piece with somebody else's faction logo on it. And what's left underneath is the frame. And the frame is the only part actually doing anything. Every model from every faction in this franchise runs on that same exact frame, no matter how different the paint job makes them look. It's the power armor frame built around the West Tech internal servo system, and without it, the rest of the suit is just expensive scrap. There's no way to wear power armor without that frame, and that's not a balanced decision. It's simply how the technology works. Full stop. With the frame, your body's ordinary movements turn into something strong enough to move a car or smash through one. And without it, you're just wearing a very expensive, very immobile piece of metal that does absolutely nothing for you. Here's the clever part, mechanically speaking. and it's the reason this technology feels different from every other vehicle in the franchise. The servo system reads your body's movements and makes them bigger. Manually steering hydraulic limbs the way you'd pilot a mech in some other franchise isn't how this works at all. You move your arm, the suit's sensors pick up the motion, and the servos move the suit's arm to match it, except with far more force than your actual muscles could ever produce. Which means a punch that would barely bruise someone can suddenly cave in a skull. It's closer to power steering than to remote control. The suit isn't doing something different from what your body's doing, it's the same exact thing, just amplified to a degree that should honestly terrify you a little. That extra power has to come from somewhere, and the answer to where is more dramatic than it sounds. There's a unit on the back called the TX28 Microfusion Pack, generating around 60,000 watts according to the games, which is not a small number. That's industrial scale power strapped to one person's spine. To put that in perspective, that's roughly enough to run 40 or 50 average American houses at once, except instead of running houses, it's running the hydraulics in a suit one person is wearing while just trying to walk in a straight line. Those hydraulics are called high flow in the games, and their entire job is converting that power into the strength and carrying capacity that makes power armor worth wearing in the first place. Even with no plating attached, the bare frame still does something, giving you more carry weight, more melee damage, and complete immunity to fall damage. The frame is doing the strength work. The plating's just there to stop you from getting shot, which, fair, is also something you want living somewhere like the Wasteland. Most players never notice the frame doing anything on its own, since nobody walks around in an empty frame on purpose. All of that strength still has to come from a power source, though, and that power source is exactly where this entire technology starts to fall apart, in ways that have killed more wearers than any enemy ever has: the fusion core. The single most punishing flaw in all of power armor isn't a design choice, it's a contradiction the games have never actually resolved, and it changes how you should think about every fight you've ever won in one of these suits. If the frame is the muscle, the fusion core is what's actually feeding it, and the lore and the gameplay openly contradict each other on exactly how that's supposed to work. In Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, power armor runs on one standardized fusion core, a small reactor about the size of a large flashlight battery that slots directly into the frame and can, in theory, work in any suit you own. Honestly, a smart piece of design. Since one universal power source instead of a different battery for every model means you can loot a core off any wrecked suit and keep moving, which solves the exact supply problem that crippled the T-45 back in the actual war. The real problem, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to notice it, is how fast the thing actually drains. And it drains fast enough that it should genuinely bother you. A fusion core in Fallout 4 lasts about as long as a few hours of continuous wear before it's completely empty, which means the single greatest piece of military technology in the franchise has a battery life shorter than a phone. That's a strange detail once you remember that this exact same fusion technology runs entire pre-war cities and keeps vault reactors going by themselves for 2 centuries without anyone checking on them. Vault 101's reactor lasted longer than the war itself, yet your power armor core can't even outlast one long quest, and nobody in this entire franchise has ever explained why. There isn't a satisfying explanation for that in the lore, and that absence should bother you more than it probably does. The common theory is that whatever made fusion cores last so long before the war either degraded over 200 years or simply wasn't manufactured at the scale the Wasteland actually needs now. Neither one is ever confirmed anywhere. It's just the explanation that makes the math hurt less, and the real answer is almost certainly just game balance, since unlimited power on an unstoppable suit would break the difficulty entirely. What is confirmed is that pulling the fusion core out of a suit while someone's still standing inside it shuts the whole thing down immediately, with no warning and no slow stop, which means the most powerful soldier on the battlefield can be turned into a stationary target in under a second. Some of the later, more security-conscious suits even need a specific key just to remove the core at all, built that way specifically to stop someone from stealing your power armor while you're wearing it, though that also means an enemy holding the right key could just as easily lock you inside your own suit instead, turning your own protection into a cage. The frame, the servos, and the fusion core are identical across every single model that ever got built, which means every single suit you're about to meet shares this exact same weakness, no matter how impressive it looks. What actually changes from suit to suit is everything else, and getting that difference wrong, mistaking a suit's reputation for what it can actually survive, is exactly the kind of mistake that gets people killed in this franchise. The models. Power armor was never just one suit, and treating it like one means missing the part of this story that actually explains the Wasteland. It's a whole product line, refined across more than a decade of war, and then refined again for 2 centuries after the war ended, by whoever happened happen to inherit the blueprints, for better or much, much worse. Which model you're looking at tells you something specific about when and where you actually are in the story, and getting that wrong can mean misreading an entire faction's intentions. There's the T-45, already covered, the rushed fix from 2067 that soldiers died testing. Then the T-51, the better, pre-war high point from 2076, the one every faction in the wasteland is still trying to get even now, 200 years later, because nobody's actually built a better suit since. And that should tell you something disturbing about how little progress the wasteland has actually made. The T-60 comes next by date, and it's kind of a sad story once you look at it closely, not a triumphant one. Built not long after the US won at Anchorage to replace the aging T-51 in Army units back home, the T-60 was in the middle of being issued to those units when the bombs actually fell, which means thousands of suits ended up serving nobody at all. Entire warehouses full of brand new suits, fully built, never given to anyone, on the day the world ended. 2 centuries later, those same warehouses are exactly the kind of thing the Brotherhood of Steel specializes in finding, and that's not a coincidence. That's the entire reason their armor looks the way it does. The Brotherhood didn't invent the T-60, and they didn't design it either. They just got extremely good at locating pre-war stockpiles nobody else had the people to claim, and the suit became their signature look, almost by accident, not by merit. It even carries one small extra piece of bad luck forward with it, and this part should genuinely unsettle you. That original chest weld flaw from the T-45 back in 2067, the same weak point that got soldiers killed on the Alaskan front, apparently never got properly fixed across 2 entire later generations of armor. It shows up again in the T-60 decades and several redesigns later, which means every single paladin wearing one today is walking around with a weakness West Tech never bothered to close, and says something either about West Tech's quality control or about how little anyone was actually rechecking the welds once there was a war on and a deadline to meet. Then there's the X-01, and its story isn't really about winning any wars. It's about a project that ran out of time while it still had a long list of unsolved problems, commissioned directly by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which tells you exactly how seriously the military was taking the idea of a real next-generation suit, one that would make the T-51 and T-60 look like the quick fixes they basically were. The problem is that the X-01 barely worked by the time the war actually ended, and what existed of it was closer to a collection of separate, promising parts than an actual finished suit anyone could trust their life to. Old pre-war documents mention at least 3 different frame designs still waiting on approval as late as mid-2077, which is not a great sign for equipment that's supposed to already be combat ready, and the soldiers who would have worn it never got the chance to find out it wasn't. The Enclave eventually picked up the project years later, working from whatever broken plans and surviving prototype parts they could salvage from the ruins of Adams Air Force Base, where the X-01 had first been built before the war. What they ended up fielding decades after the Great War wasn't really the same suit West Tech had been racing to finish, it was something closer to a patchwork revival, held together by a name and a reputation more than any single completed pre-war design, which means even the Enclave's most advanced suit is built on borrowed credibility. After the war, the Enclave kept building too, producing an entire second generation of suits with no pre-war pedigree at all. Hellfire armor, assembled from leftover parts of a cancelled robot project, became the signature look for their flamethrower troopers, with one early prototype even sent out to Vault 51 back in 2080. Tesla armor traded protection for raw energy damage on purpose, with actual coils mounted on the shoulders that fed extra power straight into a laser or plasma weapon. And not every suit even came from the military. Excavator power armor was built by a private mining company called Garahan for digging, not fighting, and Raider power armor is just scrap metal and rebar welded onto a stolen frame, because by that point, looking dangerous mattered more than actually being protected. 4 completely different philosophies, built by 4 completely different people, and not one of them was thinking about keeping you safe. Knowing all of this tells you exactly when a suit was built, and who built it, and why. But it still doesn't answer the one question that actually decides whether any of this matters to you personally, whether you'd have even been allowed to put one on, and the answer to that question is a lot crueler than you'd expect. The training. In 2 of these games, you could find the single best suit on this entire list, in perfect condition, with the door standing wide open, and you still would not be allowed to touch it. In Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, you cannot put on power armor at all, no exceptions. And the game does not negotiate on this. It doesn't matter if you found a complete suit in perfect condition with the door wide open, and your stats and your strength don't factor into it either. It's just a flat, total lockout without the right perk. Without power armor training specifically, the game simply will not let your character climb inside, and there is no workaround you can grind your way past. Lore gives a practical reason for this. though it never really gets explained in detail, which is exactly the kind of gap that should make you suspicious. Apparently, the servo system reacts to the wearer in ways that require training to use safely, and an untrained person either moves badly enough to be useless in a fight, or risks the suit's own strength working against their joints, depending on which terminal you read, meaning the same suit built to protect you could just as easily break you. The games never actually show what happens if you skip the training and try anyway, mostly because they never let you try in the first place, and that silence is doing a lot of work the writers never had to justify. That's one of those rules that's always enforced, but only ever explained a little, if it gets explained at all, and you start noticing that exact pattern everywhere once you go looking for it across the franchise. You get the perk one of two ways depending on the game, and missing both of them means that suit in the corner stays exactly where it is forever. In Fallout 3, Paladin Gunny at the Citadel trains you once Elder Lyons gives the go-ahead, no cost and no test required, and you come out the other side knowing how to use any power armor in the game, including Enclave and Outcast models. In New Vegas, it's tied to the Brotherhood of Steel's questline, or you can earn it by gathering the remnants for Arcade Ganon's quest instead, which gets you both the perk and a free suit. There's exactly one workaround in New Vegas, and it only exists because of how badly damaged the suit already is. NCR salvaged power armor doesn't need the perk at all, because its servo motors have already been physically stripped out, which means it isn't really power armor anymore, just an extremely heavy metal shell that still happens to stop bullets. You can wear it untrained simply because there's nothing left inside it to actually operate, which tells you the training requirement was never really about the armor, it was about the machine hiding inside it. Then Fallout 4 came out and quietly threw the entire system away, and nobody at Bethesda ever had to answer for it. There's no training perk and no lockout. You find a frame, press a button, and you're standing inside it, full stop, with zero explanation for why the rules suddenly changed. Raiders and random unnamed wasteland thugs wear power armor in Fallout 4 with no training whatsoever. The exact same thing that needed a whole quest chain in 2 earlier games, which means the single biggest barrier in this franchise's history just quietly stopped existing 1 game later. The franchise has never once tried to reconcile those 2 completely different rules in the same conversation, and that single inconsistency is hiding the real reason people still risk their lives putting this thing on, despite every single flaw this video has already shown you, why it still wins. Power armor was, in a lot of very real ways, built to fail the person wearing it eventually. And yet, by the end of this video, you probably want one more than you did at the start. And that gap is the actual point of everything you just watched. Power armor genuinely sucks in a lot of specific, documented ways. It runs out of power in a couple of hours. It used to lock you out completely unless you tracked down one specific person to teach you. And the exact same structural weld flaw followed it across 3 different decades because nobody ever actually fixed it. They just kept building new suits around the same old mistake. And it's still the thing every single player stops what they're doing for the moment they see one sitting in a parking garage. No hesitation. Not a second thought. The reason is actually pretty simple once you've gone through everything else in this video. And it's simpler than most fan theories make it sound. Power armor is the one piece of pre-war technology in this entire franchise that actually delivers on exactly what it promised, with no fine print. And that alone makes it rare in this universe. Vault-Tec promised safety and mostly delivered experiments. The government promised a quick war and delivered one that ended the world, but power armor promised you'd be stronger and harder to kill, and it actually does that every single time, in every single game, without exception. It's the one piece of pre-war engineering that never lied to anybody, and that should make you a little uncomfortable about everything else this franchise has ever told you. It just never figured out how to keep itself powered or who actually deserved to wear it, and 200 years later, nobody else has figured that out either, which means those 2 problems are never getting solved. Every faction that ever got its hands on a working suit kept using it almost exactly as designed because nobody ever came up with anything genuinely better. Not the Brotherhood, not the Enclave, not anyone. 2 centuries of total collapse, and the most advanced piece of personal protection on the planet is still, mechanically, the same idea West Tech rushed into production back in 2067. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn how Pip-Boys work and why they might be more dangerous than the power armor, click the video on screen now.